few years ago, so I had a chance to read it recently. But I do remember enjoying it quite a lot, a little bit more than the cartoon, which got me more into reading into it here. Which I thought was actually really good, and it did have a really good, interesting storyline. And his Schultz's arts is just breathtaking on so many levels. His line weight, his composition, it's superb, and there's not many people that can qualify to match his range of his depictions here. Even though, again, with some of his stuff, I remember the Allosaurus being very, or what they call the cutter, is very scientifically inaccurate. And I know because I worked on an Allosaurus from Wyoming for my master's thesis.
Right.
And that was, it's just the head shape. The size didn't bother me so much because, I can see an Allosaurus. We also have a replica of an Allosaurus, adult Allosaurus, in our main science building where I spent 8 years of my life working in. So I know the general size of it. So the size being a little bit smaller didn't bother me so much. It's just like the head shape and other body proportions of it just seem kind of off here. But I let it go because, again, it matches a lot more of... I don't know how much research he did, but he had to do... I imagine Schultz did quite a bit of research into it for all of his work, for everything he did. I cannot imagine him not doing it, but I think may have drawn quite a lot more inspiration from some of the Charles R. Knight paintings that show this kind of rounded skull of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and it kind of got mixed in with Allosaurus for that design here. But no, I other than that and some other things with it there, I had no problems with Dinosaur Tales. It was a really super good series.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of my personal favorite comics is Ricardo Delgado's Age of Reptiles.
Sure. Love that comic series. This is what Land Before Time should have been, if you ask me. Especially that first storyline, gang warfare.
Yeah, somebody that was a volunteer for the museum that I worked for brought in one of those books, and I was just amazed by it. I mean, I kind of liked it. So, yeah, I can agree with that the Age of Reptiles is actually very good.
The other stories in that series also are just as interesting to look at. I've read everything, every one of them, including the Ancient Egyptian series, which allows us to see a different portrayal of Spinosaurus than what we're used to seeing before that. It actually shows it going from biped, quadruped, and even it going about its business in the water, like that new paper from 2014 where Ibrahim et al. Postulated.
Yeah. I'd like to take us a little farther back. I don't know if it'll sound like I'm bragging, but when I was a child, I owned the very first issue of Turok, Son of Stone.
Ah! Awesome!
Awesome.
Okay. I love the video games.
And you kind of love what you grow up with, and
right.
And so I would like to, cite that series, and I was just looking here to see who it is. The artwork of Alberto Giolitti in that series. There were different artists throughout the extent of the series, and boy, his incredible line drawings in that series were just fabulous. He handled the dinosaurs so smoothly, and he always put in a lot of jungle vegetation and that sort of thing.
Right.
He just really drew you into a place, and I just love that, although I do love the story too. I think that, two young men lost in the wilderness with dinosaurs, and all they got is a bow and arrow. It's like, well, good luck.
It works so well. I mean, it's such a great story.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, human interest again. See, the one of the fundamental things there is that, again, I just said it and I'll say it again. These two people have primitive weapons. So they're up against Tyrannosaurus or whatever, and they don't get their laser blaster out. They don't, dematerialize the creature. They simply go twang with the bow and hope for the best.
Right.
And that made for some really exciting human stories. Really enjoyed those.
Weren't the arrows supposed to be poisonous?
Yeah, they had a plant that they could go get and dip the arrows in the poison sap, and they were half the time they were on a journey to go get more poison. Gee, I don't know why.
Yeah, some of those Turok comics also had marine reptiles in them, like plesiosaurs and even mosasaurs that Scott can attest to.
Yeah, those are great depictions of those animals. Of course, I always thought it was a little strange. Turok and Andar, somehow with their primitive stone tools, were always able to make this fabulous raft that was, 10 logs across, and it was a perfect rectangle.
Part of the right of manhood at that time. To make a raft, you're out.
Yeah, that's right. That's what happened in King Kong, which was, of course, before Turok.
Turok, I think, first came out in the 1950s.
Yeah, 55, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, not too long after the original Godzilla first hit theaters in 54.
I remember that too. I guess I'm showing my age again. I remember my father taking me and my older brother to a movie theater, sitting down and watching that, and he kept dragging me up off the floor. I was 5 years old, and that beast had come stomping through a village, and the houses knocked flat, and I couldn't watch. I was on the floor, and my father, come on, it's only a movie. He'd keep picking me up.
And he probably didn't know at the time that there was a man in that suit playing Godzilla.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know for a while.
I think the oldest man-in-a-suit dinosaur that I can think of is in the 1940 1 million BC.
Oh, yeah.
They've got some guy in a suit playing a Tyrannosaurus. I think that's the earliest one I've ever seen.
The suit built by Tom Berman's father, Ellis, who had been making prosthetics and devices for Jack Pierce in the Universal days.
Yeah.
And Ellis was the builder of that suit.
At least it's better than taping fins to a monitor lizard.
Yes.
Oh, yes, indeed.
And then making them fight.
They used blue for those, but
That's the only way they could have done a T-Rex in 1940 outside of stop motion that I can see, or they could have made a puppet, I guess. But
I mean, that suit was so awful. They hid the thing in the bushes for the time that it was on screen.
yeah,
it appears even in better form, and I can't remember. It's one of the serials, but the name escapes me. But I just saw photos of it online a couple of days ago, and it was sure enough the same suit, just repurposed for another show. Why spend the money when it already exists?
yeah.
Exactly.
This is common in tokusatsu films, especially Toho's films.
Mm-hmm.
Suits would often be cannibalized and repurposed into other monsters, and by the time they wanted to reuse that suit as the monster originally was, the suit's too damaged to make it of any use. Like Destroy All Monsters, for example, some of the monsters that appear to look like Baragon and Varan, their suits were all messed up and used for being used in shows like Ultraman and other Super Riot shows, just to make a reference.
Mm-hmm.
They're just thrown in the landfill afterwards. They didn't have much fanfare. They're keeping them now. There's some that they're looking at the historical value of them now, but at the one time they had to have space to build new and new stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How many of you here who here has ever read the Devil Dinosaur comics?
No, I obviously have.
Oh yeah, I have that.
I'm pretty sure you've got a complete set, Dr. Holtz.
Yep, of the original, so.
And I believe the Marvel Godzilla run, too.
Yes, indeed.
I've got a few issues of those.
I've got a couple issues of the Marvel run, too. I'm looking to buy the whole set, but for other Godzilla comics, I've got the 2 trades of Dark Horse in every IDW trade, and most of them signed by their respective artists, including Matt Frank, Jeff Zorno, and Bob Eggleton.
Oh, great.
I have a few Japanese Godzilla mangas somewhere in storage. Compendium books, basically, of stories from there. Lots of fun. There's always great. One of them is an adaptation of Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah.
Oh, cool.
I've heard of some of these manga adaptations of the Heisei era Godzilla films. And we can get back into that once we get into the more movies and then the Gojira proper. Sam wants to talk about fictional dinosaur species from cinema and whatnot.
Yeah, there's one particular made-up dinosaur here that I wanted to bring your attention to. It's from one of the Dino Crisis games, Dino Crisis 3. This creature is called the Savalrai. It's supposed to be a genetically mutated Giganotosaurus that appeared in the third game. Well, it starts out having 2 heads, but later on in the game it was a third head. Now, I don't know if you can see the picture here or not.
Come on.
Oh, it's Ghidra.
Ghidra with his Ghidorah with his wings clipped.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. I find that movies and games and comic books are filled with the made-up species of dinosaurs, and species that you don't actually see in the fossil record. Yeah, I wanted to know what you guys think of this.
Well, you've got the logic behind it is if you make up a dinosaur, then you can't have people tell you that you're wrong. So
That's always true.
Hey, yeah, you have the wrong number of toes, the wrong number of teeth, whatever. No, I just made it up. It's this.
Yeah, this was created by a supercomputer, and it has superpowers.
I don't think there's anything wrong with creating new dinosaurs, especially if you're writing a new series or something and you have dinosaurs. It's kind of what they did for like the King Kong reboot in 2005 with the V-Rex and the V-Raptors, which are obviously supposed to be parallels of Tyrannosaurus and Velociraptors without actually being those dinosaurs, but they're also visually distinct, so you can get away with that. So I don't see there was a problem with that, because dinosaurs as they are, as easy as they are, I think, to insert into media to get people's attention, you make up a completely brand new species, you make up something completely new, it just looks like a already established dinosaur, it's closely related to it, or that's some kind of excuse they can put in the movie as a descriptor for it. I don't have a problem with that here, because the only way I would have a problem with it is if they're trying to pass it off as if it actually exists rather than just movie script.
Yeah.
Is where I would have issue with it.
Yeah, exactly. If it's a creature you made up for a video game and it was designed that way from the get-go, there's no excuse for people to start ranting and raving that, oh, this is not inaccurate, oh, this is not real, it's a bloody movie monster. If it's in a horror game, you could do whatever you want, for dramatic license.
But there's a double-edged sword with that, if you recall, because the general public doesn't know a lot of some of the more obscure dinosaurs that have come out in the last 10 years. So that runs a double-edged sword of, is this an actual dinosaur? Well, yes, no, maybe so. It's kind of hard. It's hard on people like us who are paleontologists and scientists who work in this field. When someone approaches to us with this dinosaur from a game, wondering where it fits in, ask us an instant question of where it fits in relationships, and we have to look at them and go, that doesn't exist. That was made for that thing. And it may break their heart, but it puts more of the, we've got to point out to them that that's fictional, that's not, there's nothing here that's named, but that also brings a problem when we start getting into hoaxes within science itself for dinosaurs and prehistoric animals that never existed, but we had to go back and prove that they didn't exist because for reasons. If I remember correctly, I can be completely wrong. You guys can correct me. Archaeoraptor, if I remember correctly.
Oh yes, I remember. Yeah. One of the big hoaxes. I know about this one.
So that's an example of how we should be careful, and how I think even if you're writing for a new, series or something, you can still make up your own dinosaur, but be careful with how you portray it. At least in my advice, because if you portray it, say this is like it portrays something that's obviously like a 3-headed Giganotosaur, obviously it doesn't exist. But if you present something that has the shape of a Giganotosaur and give it a really kind of interesting sounding name, that it could be something realistic, whereas we have examples of stuff that is not real but has been posed as real, and then that gives us a lot of flack as scientists to try and point out that no, this is wrong, and we know this is wrong. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in that way as well.
Those are some very solid points there, Danny. I didn't really think about that.
Well, on the other hand, you could say that, take the slashers from Terra Nova, for example.
Right.
Yes.
Well,
Indeed.
Well, we of course all know that that's just a made-up dinosaur, but then again, it does look very realistic, and it kind of makes you wonder, maybe a dinosaur like this really did exist in real life. We just haven't found one like that yet.
And this goes back to our point about how pop culture and the public perceives dinosaurs, because then we get into stuff. What about real dinosaurs, but they're given fictional extraneous abilities? Dilophosaurs,
Right.
for example. Jurassic Park and how it's portrayed. Every other media and everyone and their grandmother thinks that it has frills and spits venom. So
Right.
that's kind of where I think creators need to be a little bit careful and cautious in what they do with that. Even though that it was a creative liberty by Spielberg and Crichton, people are considering it fact to the point it's being produced in other media as that, when there's no evidence for it either way.
Yeah, similarly, having the idea of thinking that Velociraptor is particularly fast, when there's no real, in fact, lacks a lot of the cursorial features that other theropods have, or that T-Rex only sees movement. I know a lot of people who think that is an attribute of the dinosaur rather than an aspect of the movie. In fact, it's even better. It's much better in the book, and I thought that was a sad thing that it didn't make that way through the movie. Is that in the novel of Jurassic Park, Tyrannosaurus Rex doesn't have this problem, but the creature that's on Jurassic Park, which has frog DNA, has this problem that it only perceives moving things as food, and that turns out to be a byproduct of the inserted frog DNA, and Grant figures it out by using the scientific method. So it would have been cool to see. He's observing it and realizes, that's what's going on. Whereas in the movie version, of course, they start off in the first scene with Grant. He's explaining that like as a known attribute of the dinosaur. And unfortunately, I encounter a lot of people in the public who think that's an attribute of the actual species Tyrannosaurus Rex and not of a Jurassic Park movie monster.
Even though, as you look at the T-Rex skull, you can tell it's got forward-facing eyes, so it sees in 3D.
Sure, yeah,
so
exactly.
that's another big thing there. That again, it's good for the book, it's good for the plot, it's good for tension. Not good for science in the long run when we've still got to consider that this is an animal that had to see in 3D, had to see movement, and if it could see movement, we wouldn't be having the argument in the pop culture side of this now. I think it's kind of been laid to rest in the scientific world of whether or not Tyrannosaurus is a predator or scavenger. So that kind of puts a damper on that. But again, that is the power of suggestion of popular media to the public and how to perceive stuff. So those are two examples I think are good examples of negative implications of how you portray dinosaurs or made up features and abilities of dinosaurs. Another good one that isn't as well known is that in the Jurassic Park Telltale games, they introduced Troodons that have a very venomous neurotoxic bite that can cause their victims to basically go catatonic, and then they use the victims as a nest for raising their young. It's a very gruesome way to die, but again, no fossil evidence for any of this, but some people in the Jurassic Park fandom and the community treat that as a legitimate ability of that. Some of them at least make sure to remember this is the Jurassic Park Troodont, not the actual scientific Troodont.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And there's a point I'd like to bring up. In the Jurassic Park sequel novel, Lost World, it actually retcons the whole notion that T-Rex can see movement. And indeed, there's actually a scene in the book where it actually disproves that the T-Rexes of Jurassic Park can only see movement. One of Louis Dodgson's thugs, George Basilton, sets up a sonic emitter which temporarily keeps the Tyrannosaurs at bay, but when that fails, he tries to follow the advice of the scientist named John Roxton, who postulated that Rex had a frog-like brain case by completely sitting still, hoping that the T-Rex doesn't see him, but as it turns out, they actually can see non-moving objects, and Basilton is horrifically devoured by the father Tyrannosaurus Rex for his stupidity in that book. And Grant, who wasn't really much of a brain expert in the book, believed John Roxton's conclusions about Tyrannosaurus having motion-based vision, and this is actually countered at several points in the book by the scientist Dr. Richard Levine, mentioning that if it rained at all the Cretaceous period, the T-Rex, if it was motion sensitive, couldn't even see its prey whatsoever.
Well,
sorry.
no. Go right ahead. No, I'll sit back out of this one here.
Yeah, but there's actually another made-up species that I kind of wanted to introduce you guys to. But first, as you probably already know, in the novelization of The Lost World, there was supposed to be a carnivore in it that could actually change colors like a chameleon.
Right.
And they later incorporated this idea into the Indominus Rex in Jurassic World.
Right.
In the Dino Crisis 3 game, there's actually a species of raptor in that game that has an ability very similar to that called the Algal. It's a genetically mutated raptor that has no eyes and blasts electricity from its body, but later on in the game it's revealed that it can also render itself partially invisible. There's
like the Predator.
Yeah, there's a picture here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, later on in the game, these things can render themselves partially invisible. I kind of wondered if maybe in some way that was somehow inspired by the Carnotaurus from the novelization of The Lost World. I've often wondered if they got that idea from The Lost World.
I think it's more inspired by the Predator's ability to camouflage itself more than anything else. Because when you think of aliens or monsters, that can bend light to make themselves partially invisible, most of them are inspired by the Predator or Yautja's ability to cloak itself using technology. And so, I know it's a little off topic here.
Right.
Sorry about that.
Though I think a better one to compare to that would be more interesting to see, but would be difficult for any kind of dinosaur to do, would be the camouflage and almost morphing abilities of the giant octopus. Because watching videos because they are able to even change the texture of their skin along with colorization, it is very freaky to watch them change from one point to another, and it's fascinating to watch. But for a vertebrate to do that, very difficult, I would imagine, to that extent here. Even chameleons have a limitation to the range of colors they can change to, and if I remember correctly, not all chameleons have the ability to change colors. It's a very specific derivative within their clade, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. And then on top of that, changing the skin texture, for creatures that have a heavily keratinized outside, whether it's scales or feathers, you don't have the soft tissue that you could bulge up or squish back or whatever, like a cephalopod. And it would be cool, but it wouldn't be a real dinosaur if you had something like that. So.
Yeah, and as far as that goes, in my writings, I have a sort of a guiding principle, and that is that dinosaurs are birds. They started from something more, crocodile-like perhaps, but even from the very early time, they look much more sophisticated. And so then when I decide something like, should I have this thing change color? Well, then I ask myself, and which bird changes color?
Right.
Or which alligator changes color? And correct me if I'm wrong, Tom especially, but none of them?
None of them, yeah.
Only when they're growing up.
Well,
over time, with shedding feathers and that sort of thing, of course. But, automatically on demand, there are none. And so then, and maybe this is actually my problem. I'm stuck with the fact that the way I do the Dinosaur Wars books, the animals have to have a precedent in real nature. And of course, the chameleon is a precedent in real nature, but it's so outside the realm of dinosaurs that I stop myself there. Again, I'm just saying this is the way I view it. I'm not saying whether it's right, wrong, good, bad in a movie or a game.
Well, you got fossilized melanosomes now for dinosaurs and marine reptiles.
Yeah. Exactly.
That tell you what color they were.
Yeah, not just for dinosaurs, but for some other animals too. We know what coloration they were.
Yeah, or at least part of the color. Because after all, melanosomes or melanin, it is a part of color, but it's only part of color. So the scales or feathers, they include melanosomes, they include structural color, carotenoids, porphyrins. So there's all sorts of aspects to make up what the actual appearance was. So we know more about color than we did 10 years ago, but there's still lots and lots and lots of stuff that we don't know. So artists, be creative. Make sure you do incorporate lots of different ideas.
The paleontologists, let's get looking for those vitamin B derivatives.
Yeah.
All right, let's start sawing open some dinosaur legs and see what we can find.
Well, speaking of cracking open dinosaur bones, that's the only way to determine what actual gender of dinosaur is to crack open certain bones and actually look for a specific type of tissue called medullary tissue, found only in birds that are about to ovulate, about to lay eggs. And only one specimen of Tyrannosaurus has actually been conclusively identified as being a female.
Right.
Specimen that was described by Dr. Mary Schweitzer.
Right. Ironically, he was called Bob, but so it was a girl named Bob.
Yeah, specimen dubbed B-Rex.
Yep. It would be better. I'd almost say it would be better if it was a boy named Sue, but we already have that.
Exactly. Yeah.
She's at the Field Museum.
Yeah, she's going to be going into hibernation for about a year.
Yep.
Well, I would argue that probably the most famous and well-known and made-up species of dinosaur is Godzilla. I cannot think of...
No, without question.
I have never met even just one person who's never heard of Godzilla before.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, Godzilla himself has had a massive impact on dinosaur pop culture by himself as a whole, more than any other monster.
And of course, he's had a massive impact on Tokyo.
They got one hell of
the culture for years to understand that dinosaurs didn't breathe fire.
Actually, it's supposed to be radiation. It's not really.
Only two versions of Godzilla actually truly did breathe fire: the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla and the one from Marvel Comics.
Ah, true. Yes.
They're the only ones that actually were genuine fire breathers. Everything else is radioactive death or electromagnetically charged particle beams, like in the anime film.
Well, the thing is with Godzilla is he is still again from that time period. There's still a very common depiction of what a dinosaur is.
Right.
Upright stance, tail dragging, features like the spikes and all the other stuff are superficial here, but he's still that very stereotypical version of the dinosaur there, which is why he still resonates as still a dinosaur, even though I could argue that he's not actually a dinosaur in the first Godzilla movie. Because I would argue, not to get off topic here, I would argue is like some kind of Permian or maybe Ordovician transitional reptile because he's a transitional I'm sorry, I'm flipping my words here. I apologize.
Marine reptile?
Marine reptile of a sort, a semi-terrestrial, semi-aquatic reptile, at least. Not really a true dinosaur, but that's also getting a little bit off topic here. Godzilla is by far the most recognizable aspect of what people still, in some senses, still think a dinosaur is. Even if you go back to all the old movies, even with the impact of Jurassic Park, you've got all the old movies, Valley Guanji, 1 million years BC, when dinosaurs ruled the earth, all of these still have this lumbering, tail-dragging, upright stance, carnivore, apex predator.
Right.
That still makes an impact of all that. So that still kind of ties into that conception of dinosaurs and how they're perceived by people. And Godzilla's often perceived as a dinosaur because he still fits some of that, what people consider a dinosaur to be, even with Jurassic Park and the new science coming forward, and the advent of social media as a means of distributing information.
Sure.
It's
Exactly.
sound inspired.
Exactly. Alright, here. What are some other dinosaur films we could brush up on that are pretty important to this whole discussion? I'd say let's discuss the 1925 Lost World and its novel by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Sure. I mean, it really launched. There had been some stop motion in shorts before, and in The Ghost on Slumber Mountain, but those weren't blockbusters the way The Lost World was. In fact, I just recently heard that The Lost World was the first movie ever shown on an airplane. So they must have actually had, as they pointed out, it would have been celluloid film, which is a fire hazard, on an old-fashioned projector, which is also a fire hazard, up on a plane. But it was shown apparently in the 20s or 30s in the air. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because if I remember correctly, the book did not really mention certain dinosaur names that much, but I think because I know Tyrannosaurus Rex was not even mentioned in the book, whereas it was mentioned in the film. It's just that it's not in the book. So that's one thing that is a big difference from the film and the book.
Right, because
wasn't the book written before Tyrannosaurus Rex was even discovered?
Let's see, The Lost World, when did that come out?
Because Tyrannosaurus was 1908, Barnum Brown. 1905, okay, 1905.
Yeah.
Barnum Brown, so I thought, because Doyle was writing in the up to the 1890s.
His Lost World novel released in 1912. So T-Rex was known, but it wasn't necessarily in a lot of popular literature yet.
And I think it's safe to say that Conan Doyle would have been looking at the Richard Owen sculptures of Megalosaurus would have been the #1 meat eater that he'd have been looking at, and Iguanodon for the plant eaters. And I'm sure that he was, relying on his own personal experience there, whereas the T-Rex would be something in a dusty manuscript somewhere for him.
Right.
He might not have ever even seen it.
Right. Whereas by the time the movie was made, there was this body of Charles R. Knight paintings and drawings to draw upon, and O'Brien very clearly, there's no question about that. We know he did. There's stories about it and so forth, records of it, where he drew upon those paintings as the sources for his models, and so because of that, Tyrannosaurus was already available as a model. Triceratops with a baby, which is a meme of its own in the history of paleo art. Probably the most commonly illustrated baby dinosaur is a baby Triceratops, and that's due to large part because of Charles R. Knight putting one in a painting back in the early 1900s.
Shame on me for putting that into my latest Dinosaur Wars book, number 5.
How dare you, sir?
Oh, all right, how about we step back either before Lost World to writer Jules Verne and his work in his seminal classic Journey to the Center of the Earth from 1874.
Right.
Oh God, it's been such a long time since I read it.
Yeah, boy, it's been so long.
I don't recall a lot of dinosaurs in it. I recall marine reptiles, but I don't recall any specific dinosaurs of any kind. And I can be incorrect on this. It's been a long time.
He has a fight there between Ichthyosaurus and Plesiosaurus, which is actually based on early drawings. There's early people have researched and found what particular science books Verne had available, and in one of them there is a painting that shows a battle between. Well, they're calling it Ichthyosaurus. It's now actually Temnodontosaurus because Ichthyosaurus proper is actually not that big.
I think it was a lithograph, because I think it was a lithograph back then. I think I can see the one you're talking about, and I remember it. I don't know who it is or who did it. But no, that
I remember that one or the other of them has the flipper in his jaws. I think the Ichthyosaur has the Plesiosaurus flipper in his jaws or something.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Long time since I've looked at that book.
Yeah, the first film adaptation came out in the 1950s, starring I think it was Pat Boone.
Pat Boone, yeah.
Yes.
I've seen that movie. It's actually it's probably the best adaptation of the story.
The only film version that I can think of that actually had a real dinosaur in it was the 2008 version with Brendan Fraser in it.
Yeah, it had a Giganotosaurus.
that Giganotosaurus? I thought that was just generic Tyrannosaur.
No, they had the 3 fingers. It wasn't a Rex.
Well, Rex technically has 3 fingers. You just once vestigially you don't see it. So.
Just from Wikipedia alone, it actually said Giganotosaurus.
Why did the head look like a Rex then? Anyways, creative issues again with dinosaurs in movies.
Right.
Yeah.
I just remember it had a very Rex head. I've only seen it once, and I really was not had a desire to watch it again.
I've only ever seen snippets of that film, including the footage of that dinosaur chasing Brendan Fraser and that child character around in that underground cavern. Pretty forgettable.
I just thought of another film we could talk about. The Rite of Spring from Fantasia.
Sure.
Oh, that's
classic inspired by Charles Knight's work.
Yeah, and it is, and I thought it was supposed to be like an Allosaurus in there at first when I first saw it because I was really young, because it had the 3 fingers, and of course T-Rex didn't have the 3 fingers, but apparently it was because Barnum Brown, talking with Walt Disney, this is a story I've heard, said it looks cooler with 3 fingers. So Walt Disney has animators animated with 3 fingers, but it is supposed to be a T-Rex. But that is a gorgeous set.
In the 19-teens, the hand, and then 20s, the hands of Albertosaurus and Gorgosaurus were found, and they had only 2 fingers. But we didn't have Tyrannosaurus hands until much more recently. So there was always the thought early on that Tyrannosaurus may have had 3 fingers, the ancestral condition. Eventually, when Tarbosaurus hands were found, and they were 2-fingered as well, and we realized, okay, all Tyrannosaurids had it, and that was eventually confirmed. So it wasn't unreasonable for artists of the first part of the 20th century to put the 3 fingers on the hand. Now, from our point of view, it's weird, but they weren't. They were wrong for the right reasons. To put it that way.
To me, the main diagnostic of whether that was a Rex or not is that it was fighting with the Stegosaurus.
Right. It was fighting with the Stegosaurus while the Triceratops watches on. So
that's just even more confusing.
Yeah.
It's been often said that the time span between Stegosaurus and Tyrannosaurus Rex is actually greater than Tyrannosaurus Rex to modern humans.
Yes, indeed.
That is correct.
And then, there are lots of nice elements in that whole the Rite of Spring. I mean, it's got the world's cutest Euglena early on. It's a little cartoon Euglena, and they show the origin of life. You don't often see cute single-celled organisms, but there it is. And the model of extinction at the end, which reflects what Osborne and Brown had thought about, which was that it was great, revolutions of uplift of mountain ranges, what they call diastrophism at the time, and because it is true that there was a big uplift of the Rockies at the time, but they're interpreting it as basically the whole world. Plus, it gives the whole, it can be dramatic to show a mountain coming up and having the chords of music going up with it. So.
Yeah, all in all, that's a very fantastic sequence of animation from Walt Disney himself, animated back in the day. Very influential.
Yeah.
And there's also, we can't do a discussion of this or a decade without discussing Gertie the Dinosaur.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Both one of the earliest animation attempts, and also one of the earliest attempts, if I recall, aside from animation, is to show how popular dinosaurs were in its use as entertainment as well, which was very, very well done for the time. I'd have to think, because if I remember the act well, the animator interacted with Gertie at the right time skips as part of his act to make Gertie seem more alive than just images on a screen.
Oh,
so.
Sorry, wasn't the animator's name Windsor McKay? Was it?
Yeah, it was Windsor McKay.
So.
Yeah,
he was the animator. Yep, and the techniques he used were very revolutionary for that period of time, including the insertion of himself into the animation of the dinosaur sequence.
Right.
He's like a lot of cells of animation to achieve this effect. I don't know exactly how many, but it's kind of mind-boggling when you really think about it.
I don't know if it was ever officially produced or not, but I've seen clips from Gertie on Tour, which I think was supposed to be a sequel to Gertie the Dinosaur.
Yes, there is a Gertie sequel. I've seen clips from it, so I know Gertie interacts with a bus or a train or something in it at one point.
She interacts with the toad in it.
Okay, that's right. Yes. Yep. And Gertie was the very first character specifically invented for animation, because the earlier Winsor McKay cartoons he had done, he did a couple earlier, but they were using Nemo of Slumberland or other characters that he had done from comic strips. Whereas I believe the story is Gertie was invented specifically for the cartoon, and that makes her the very first, literally cartoon character.
That's very important. And I think now we could try to jump over to the 1925 Lost World movie proper. And this place in cinematic history.
Mm-hmm. I actually used to have that on DVD. Stupid me, I lost it though.
So that film has undergone a number of restorations over the course of the decade. And they just released a new cut of the film that's actually the most complete version of this film to date, with some footage that has never been, seen before.
Wow. Yeah, I have a version that was from at the beginning of the century, from about 2000 or so, and that was more complete than a lot of the earlier ones. But now, I see that there's one that's got like 10 more minutes or more. So that's the thing with these old-time films, is people find, at a random attic somewhere, reels that people had forgotten about.
So, just as a whole, The Lost World, it was groundbreaking in so many ways. The animation of the Willis O'Brien, that was so convincing back then. People actually thought they were seeing documentary footage of real live dinosaurs. Because folks back in the period of time weren't really all that familiar with the whole stop-motion process.
Mm-hmm. That footage, the test footage for The Lost World, fooled Harry Houdini and a group of magicians at the time, so it must have been pretty effective. And speaking of found footage, lost film that was found. Back to the Ghost of Slumber, Ghost of Slumber Mountain,
right?
Which seemed to have been, or even I think even along the Moonbeam Trail. Also now is thanks to Stephen Cherkis, the late Stephen Cherkis, and his wife Sylvia for putting that all together.
Those are some films that I've heard discussed a lot in the stop motion Monsterland group. Some of the folks in there actually did the work in digging up those lost films. One of them even wrote a book about these lost films of Major Herbert Hawley, who was behind those movies.
That was Steve's. I believe that was Steve's last book before he passed away, or he was working on it while he passed away, and Sylvia finished it along with others. But that was quite an undertaking, and it seemed like nobody was ever going to find that footage until Steve decided to make the inquiry and ask. Do you guys have any, maybe in your attic, maybe in crawl spaces, maybe you have something? And the director of the theater that Dolly once owned wasn't even sure, and he decided to check, and he came back to Steve and said, "You're not going to believe this. I found material. He found handwritten notes and reels of film and posters and other material that seemed to have been lost forever."
Wow.
That was one of Steve's strengths. Dogged determination.
and I admire their efforts for doing so, because there were stories that were lost for time until now.
I just thought of more films. These ones I like to call the father of Godzilla and the son of Godzilla. The father is the beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and the son is Gorgo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I call the beast from 20,000 Fathoms the father of Godzilla because Godzilla was actually largely inspired by the beast from 20,000 Fathoms. And I like to refer to Gorgo as the son of Godzilla because Gorgo was largely inspired by Godzilla.
That's 100%. That's 100% correct on both counts.
And then I guess maybe Gappa came after Gorgo, so then maybe Gappa is the son of Godzilla.
Yeah, Godzilla is now pretty much the archetype of a kaiju, and there have been so many tributes and knockoffs of Godzilla, by Gorgo, Gappa, and so many others, not just in film, but also on television, in comic books, and even in kaiju fiction literature, and from the likes of author Matt Denion's Atomic Rex, for example.
Well, so some people have even said that the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms is really the first true kaiju movie. I've heard some people say.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, I mean,
That's actually though. This is kind of cool. There is a precedence for kaiju, and obviously the runaway brontosaurus at the end of The Lost World. But really, there's a scene in it's a Winsor McKay, The Rarebit Fiend, which is an early anthology cartoon of his, and one of them where here's the punchline. The punchline of everything is it was all a dream. But there's one that's called The Pet, and the pet is this quadruped, mammalian something that it will just eat everything around the house, and it starts off as puppy-sized, and eventually it's the size of a bull, and then the size of a house, and then the size of a building, and the last scenes with it, it's walking through downtown Manhattan, and it's much taller than any buildings, and there's fleets of Zeppelins coming to drop bombs on it before they wake up, and it was all a dream. And I believe that predates the scene with the runaway brontosaurus in The Lost World. So I think that may actually be like the very, very first kaiju type sequence in a broad sense of a giant monster crashing its way through a major city.
Oh, that's something that's quite obscure.
Yeah.
Alan Davis might have been the only other person in the panel besides you that may have known about that obscure reference.
Even I didn't know about that, so you learn something new every day.
Ah, cool.
What do you guys think of the Doug McClure films, like At the Earth's Core and The Land of Time Forgotten?
Oh, I love those. I did a film with Doug's daughter Tani, and we were talking one day, and I said, boy,
I get the feeling that
I said, out of all the films that your dad did, I said my favorite is The Land of Time Forgotten. She just looks at me and goes, that's my favorite also.
Yeah, the Mahars from At the Earth's Core, my opinion on them is they're kind of silly looking, but at the same time they're also kind of interesting looking on them.
Boy, those things are just shot on such low budgets. They in very short schedules too. Because stage space is booked ahead of time, so you have to, once you get your stage, your time booked at the studio, you've got to race to make sure that you meet their deadline. Otherwise you're penalized or just kicked out. And so it forces everybody to take a lot of shortcuts. And they're entertaining films. Especially At the Earth's Core, which really didn't, weren't dinosaurs, but it was interesting because they were, it looked like they were offshoots or evolutionized dinosaurs,
right?
Because of a different environment. And
right.
McDougal McDixon had some theories about that, and for you, you're gonna go look at. I'm gonna lose my train of thought, but still, but they're fun films. they really, I think they worked very hard on those, and I know Roger Deakins, did a great job on Land That Time Forgot, despite the fact that he had done all the puppets for When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth.
Right.
And the thought originally was, and I think his original thought, that he was going to do stop motion, or they were going to do it that way, and they said no, we just don't have the budget for it, so he decided to go for hand and rod puppets for it. I think they did a really good job. I think they had it was very entertaining films and very, very, very true to the spirit of the original source material.
I don't think they ever explained this in the film version, but in the original Edgar Rice Burroughs novel, the Mahars are described as being all female and can reproduce genetics.
And there's also said they're hyper-evolved telepathic pterosaurs.
Right. Specifically Ramparincus.
Yeah.
And in the original book, there's also a whole menagerie of dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures, whereas in the film, you don't see very many, true dinosaurs, so to speak.
Yeah,
Except for in Land of Time Forgot, you actually do get some dinosaurs, including some marine reptiles and some Neanderthals.
Right.
There's actually a pretty funny scene in the movie where Peter Cushing says to one of the Mahars, "You can't mesmerize me, I'm British."
That's I think they use that in more than one film.
And what's kind of funny is right around the same time that he's making that movie, he's also just about to go act as Grand Moff Tarkin. So we have this cheesy, overacting, comical character, and within weeks or something, he's going off to play this great, grandiose villain. So
the strength of Peter Cushing is diversity.
Yes. All right, we got Denny back.
It was disappearing.
He has a connection problems.
Yeah, sorry about that. Had some connection problems. I had to go work on it a little bit to get that back up and going here. But I'm back.
And we got Jeff back here, so we're even. Chris had to leave.
I had to go to my phone. I've been using my tablet so much today. I forgot that. I completely forgot it was Tuesday. Actually, I thought it was Monday still. That's when he said we're gonna contact me. I went, oh my god, what am I thinking? It's like here I told you I was ready for it, and here I really wasn't. So
anyhow, we were discussing Edgar Rice Burroughs and his adaptations of his books. At Your Core, Land of Time Forgot, People of Time Forgot, those stories. What I call the Castback series as well.
One of the weirdest things about the film adaptation of The People of Time Forgot was that tribe of people at the end of the movie. They look a lot like samurais, or they're dressed like samurais.
Yeah.
That was so weird.
Well, it was like they were like, I'm sure production was, well, what do we have that can like show a primitive yet advanced society, and then probably somebody in the costume department said, like, we got a bunch of samurai costumes here. And he's like, that's it, done.
That's how I imagine the pitch.
Anyway, some Guinness and
yes, Scott makes mention of the John Norman series Gore having dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because I remember I never really read them, but I do remember the giant eagles that they rode, and not beyond that I can remember too much, although I just watched the film adaptations of both of them back to back, and they really could have used at least some giant eagles for it.
Speaking of eagles, how about we take a little segue here into an unmade film, the abandoned Willis O'Brien, Ray Harryhausen project, War Eagles.
That sounds like that would have been a film if it were made.
That's a premise. That's a film I personally would have loved to have seen and done and animated in Ray Harryhausen style. The premise is just alone. You got people riding giant eagles battling Nazis over New York City. I mean, that is a cool premise, if you ask me.
Wonderful premise that was killed by actual people fighting Nazis. I mean, the World War II came up, and and killed it because obviously resources needed to be funneled towards the war effort, towards the film, whatever films, war films, and things they were needing that cost just a lot less. And it's so sad because there's so much pre-production that went into it, as well as some test footage that was shot, just brief bits here and there. But we have photographic evidence of that. I don't know if we actually have the film evidence, but yeah, it certainly would have been a lot of fun. And I guess recently a novelization was published.
Yeah, I know of that novelization. I actually have a book that has the completed script, or I think it was a complete script for the War Eagles film. It's got a complete rundown of that movie. I haven't read it yet, but if I do read it, I will definitely post a review of it, and give an analysis of it there.
I just thought of another film that was never made, Creation, which was basically of King Kong.
And it was thanks to Creation that King Kong was able to come in at such a premium cost. Due to all the puppets that were amortized from that film into King Kong, like the T-Rex and the
Tyrannosaurus, the Stegosaurus, the Brontosaurus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those puppets were, as well as puppets that didn't make it to King Kong, but were used in other aspects such as test footage, stand-ins, and then later all of those puppets that ended up in various other films as just background props, like a couple of Bela Lugosi films and Zombies on Broadway and Bringing Up Baby. All utilize those puppets in as background props, which is great to see. At least you get to see them still living on beyond their initial use.
Yeah, I think now we could let's jump over to King Kong. But before we do that, I think I'll let Tom say his piece here. Danny had a question to ask him.
No, this is something that we can wait until after the podcast here or something. I can talk with him in private here, so it's
all right.
Not relevant to this discussion here.
I know. Okay, sorry. Time for some monkey business here, guys. Time to discuss King Kong. Kong, the eighth wonder of the world.
The bananas. Bring the bananas.
Great romance. Great human interest.
Just a brilliant film. Simple storytelling at its best.
Cinematic magic is what I call it.
Yeah.
How about the dinosaurs in it, though?
Wonderfully animated by Willis O'Brien.
Exactly, and again, drawn directly, for the most part, from Charles R. Knight, so the leading paleo artist of the time. Now, and granted, yes, they're too big, but so's Kong, so we can't complain.
The puppets themselves were huge.
Yeah, so apparently, Cooper and so forth was saying, as he would say it, okay, this is great, make them bigger. And they drew a new sketch. He said, okay, that's great, make them bigger. So it's just Hollywood being Hollywood.
Well, it's certainly better than Cooper's original idea of getting a guy in a gorilla suit to battle some Komodo dragons.
Right.
I also heard they actually wanted to use a real gorilla in that same sequence to battle a Komodo dragon.
That's certainly a possibility. I wouldn't put it past Cooper. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But again, it was because Cooper was brought into RKO to sort of sort things out production-wise. He was brought in originally as what's a lack of a better word, an executioner. He was brought in to cut the fat from the studio, see what projects looked like they would be worth it, and what projects were going to cost too much. And it was only because he had Kong already brewing in the back of his mind that he saw what O'Brien was doing with Creation and was able to save O'Brien. I mean, they would have just they would have said thanks, and put O'Brien out in the street and locked everything away. RKO would have been very happy to do that until Cooper was able to convince them that it might be a good idea to do a story of this type, and the fact that they had a lot of the sets already built, and they were reusing sets from The Most Dangerous Game.
Right.
The staff was there. They had, they had everything they needed, and it was the most expensive project of the time. And even though they had very little faith in it, once I think the studio execs started seeing rushes, it started getting them excited. They kind of knew they had something on their hands, but it wasn't until I think they had a final cut that they knew that they had something special on their hands.
Back when I was still a kid, I would very often watch the original King Kong on VHS, and I kid you not, every time it showed us a close-up of Kong's face, I would always hide behind the coffee table because that actually scared me.
And I think it still scares people to this day. That Kong, the face of the original 33 Kong, it's stuff of nightmares.
Yep.
Cooper got illicit tears out of audiences by the end of the film. That's for sure. Somewhere actually, I've got a little chunk of the Stegosaurus puppet that Forey Ackerman gave me years ago.
The
Just
original.
A little chunk of foam, a little chunk of foam that because Forey had the Stegosaurus, he had a number of the Kong puppets in his collection.
Yeah, for those who don't know who Forrest, that's Forrest J. Ackerman.
Right.
Big time film journalist. I think he was one of the founding fathers of the famous Monsters of Filmland magazine.
Yeah, I spent about 3 years hanging out at Forey's place when I was a teenager, and one day he came to me and said, he was digging around and it was falling apart. The plastic covering the case was falling off, and he says, hey, you want a chunk of this? And of course. And so now I've got it glued inside of a casting of Marcel Delgado's Kong sculpture, the maquette that he had done for Dompo Studios. And so it's my little Kong shrine.
That's awesome that you actually have a piece of film history, even just a little piece of it.
There's a couple of scales. It's just a piece of red foam. It's been treated with resin, I believe. So now it's rock hard, but it's like red open cell sponge foam with a few. You can still see a few scales attached to it from the surface. So, it's one of my few prized possessions.
Okay, a little message here from Dr. Holt. He's going to have to leave here soon.
Yep.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, go ahead.
I don't know how long they've been debating this, but I've heard a lot of Kong fans debate with each other as to exactly what species of ape Kong is supposed to be. I've heard some people say he's a gorilla, and I've heard other people say he's a prehistoric species of ape, like a Gigantopithecus or something else entirely.
If you go back to Cooper, it's a gorilla.
Yeah,
Cooper always had him as a gorilla, but it was. But I believe that when O'Brien and Delgado were doing it. Delgado, of course, doing all of the major amount of the work on the model itself. I think there was that making a little more of the human side. Because if you look at, the different puppets, there were two puppets that they both had slightly different looks to them.
I know.
I think they played around with it, but according to Cooper, it was a gorilla. So I always trust the man who created it.
Well, that's indeed the case. Joe DeVito, artist and writer, has actually expanded upon the 1933 Kong in considerably more detail in his King of Skull Island series. And he actually has got some interesting insights into the background on King Kong's origins and whatnot. I haven't read the new story that he's put out, but Sam's a little more into that, I think. So, you want to tell us a little bit about Joe's work on King Kong, King of Skull Island?
Well, in Joe's version, he actually changed what species Kong is. In Joe's version, Kong is actually not a gorilla, but rather a prehistoric species of ape that's mostly carnivorous and in fact fed on other large mammals like mammoths, intricatheres, and even Gigantopithecus.
And this might be kind of a spoiler, but there's also another, he also revealed the existence of another giant ape species called the Thaku.
There's also a species of dinosaur in it called Gaw, which later turns out to be the dinosaur that killed Kong's parents. The story describes it as this huge dromaeosaur-like dinosaur that even the T-Rexes live in fear of.
And Gaw is the leader of a horde of hyper-intelligent evolved raptors that are known as Death Runners. As they were described in an interview in prehistoric times as being the dinosaurian counterpart to a chimpanzee, or maybe even a little more than that, actually.
Well, I think Joe said that raptors are the equivalent of chimpanzees, whereas Death Runners are more the equivalent of primitive humans.
Highly intelligent, capable of mimicking human sounds, and even capable of making primitive weapons.
And building simple traps, as a matter of fact. You know, there's actually a scene in Joe's recent book where one of the natives is out looking for food, and he comes across this wounded Death Runner, and as he approaches it, he quickly realizes that the Death Runner is actually luring him into a trap, and a whole pack of Death Runners jumps down from trees and gangs up on him.
And the Gaw is specifically said to be a mutant that comes up every so now and then to basically become the undisputed leader of these dinosaurs. She has the ability to command them, control them, direct them. Sort of like a queen bee, so to speak, among dinosaurs.
Well, I wonder how big the island really is. I mean, it supports so many species, and must be continent. You know, must be a continent out there.
In Joe's new book, it's revealed that Skull Island is actually much larger than Carl Denham had originally believed it to be. The map that he received in Skull Island was actually drawn from. Skull Island is much bigger than that.
You know, this reminds me of a thought I had. I just watched the 2005 just a couple of days ago. And it's in both the 33 and the 2005, I spotted something kind of peculiar. Okay, so whatever ancient people these were, they had built this incredible wall. They had built this gigantic wall somehow that could keep that great big monster at bay. Okay, so here's the flash of insight that I had just the other day. And they put a King Kong-sized door in it. Why?
That's a question that...
Maybe they're waiting for a King Kong-sized pizza.
Well, all jokes aside, this is actually explained in Joe's stories. Long ago, the Kongs actually were not as savage as they were at present times. They actually were tamed by the ancient civilization that lived on the island known as the Tagu, or Tagatu tribe. They enlisted the help of these giant apes to build their walls and to build the gates. So while the Kongs could come and go freely, the walls to keep out the dinosaurs, but the Kongs could come and go freely.
All right, I like that explanation. Somehow I doubt it was operant in making.
I just wonder who
movie.
My only thought is who cleans up after him.
If that were for real, there is no way a wall like that would be able to keep an ape out that big. I mean, if that were for real, Kong would easily be able to climb over that thing in real life. But
well, in terms of dramatic license, it's they sure did make one hell of a film. I mean, it's always a classic, and it's nice to see that people are inspired by it and expand on it. Have fun with it.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
To the question, why did they put a Kong-sized door in it, is because it's a lot more fun when they put that door in, because he knocks it down and they have, glad they put that door there.
I think I better get a little
would have been a different story if he never would have been able to make it through.
Yeah, if he just shrugged his shoulders and said, well, nice looking girl, but, she's on the other
I'll wait for the
wall. That's it.
Yeah, anyone want to comment about the 76 Kong while we're at it? Or should we not even discuss that?
I find it highly more entertaining than the Peter Jackson version now. I didn't enjoy it originally, but now there's something about it that it's of its own time. I look at film as a time capsule, and each film of a different era adds something into it that reminds you, especially now that we're so far beyond it, you go back to it. And notwithstanding the Twin Towers in the film and their place, but it really, there's a lot to it that I think that's entertaining. It would have just been a lot more entertaining with dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And then
it
there's
was
the Universal
a sexier
version.
Kong.
Yeah, and there's the Universal version that never got off the ground.
Yeah, the first draft of Peter Jackson's King Kong strip from 1996.
Well, there's even the earlier one at the time that the Dino De Laurentiis one was going, and Paramount and Universal were both battling over.
Oh yeah, there was
Universal's Legend of King Kong, which was
I would like to talk more about that one actually. The Jim Danforth Legend of King Kong script.
Yeah.
I've read the script, and I actually think this would have made 76 a lot better of a movie.
Yeah, it would have been a lot more fun. I knew Jim at the time, or just probably like soon after that, and it was, I don't think it was a sore spot, but I know that when the De Laurentiis Kong, I believe won the an Oscar for, I think it was an Oscar at that time, or given an Oscar. He turned his he resigned from the Academy because of it. I'm wondering if there was still a little bit of sour grapes from his chance getting pushed aside. But it would have had a great cast. I mean, Peter Falk.
Yeah, Peter Falk, Susan Blakesley,
Nick Nolte.
Yeah.
It would have been an interesting film, and it's certainly they were going for, they had the original source material, the novel, to go by, the Dallas Lovelace book that they were following, and it would have been nice to see that.
Well, at one point, Hammer was actually going to do their own version.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to pick Harryhausen to do that.
Yeah. Absolutely correct, yeah.
Yeah, just like with the unmade Godzilla films, there are just as many unmade Kong films, almost.
That reminds me of something I wanted to ask you, Jeff. I've heard rumors that Roger Corman wanted to do his own version of King Kong. Is there any truth to that at all?
Oh, God, something, I don't have much information on that. That's something I could check out. I wouldn't put it past them that they might have wanted to do something like that, but I think that was just boiled down to maybe just wishful thinking. But I wouldn't put it past them. So maybe it'd be a good subject to research and talk about a little bit later.
Yeah. Actually, before Tom goes, there's a question I'd like to pose to all of you. One of the questions we were going to ask Michael Sola is, how important do you think paleofiction, that is literature, is to paleontology in general?
I have a definite opinion on that because, as I've mentioned, I've published on either side of the divide. I've published bona fide paleontological articles on dinosaur brooding behavior, and then I write that sort of thing in my fiction and develop fictionalized images or word portraits of dinosaurs up close and personal with the human heroes in the story. And I can tell you that the thinking for me, my contribution of the dinosaur brooding papers to paleontology was actually an outgrowth of my fiction. So, at least in my case, you can safely say it cuts both ways. And I think that there will probably be more of that in the future because of anything from movies to books to games that are bringing dinosaurs to life. And as I said earlier, paleontologists tend to want the bone evidence. They need to dig in some rocks and pull up what they can get their hands on. Otherwise, they can't make a hypothesis that they can defend. They have the problem of, a speculation. Well, in fiction, of course, you can speculate all you want, and that's fair game. So then the question becomes, will the real paleontologists pick up on this? So my feeling is that they have, and they will continue to do so.
That kind of brings me to an author that's been publishing some paleofiction as of late. It's a series of novels called the Kronos Rising series by Max Hawthorne. The premise of this series involves the survival of the pliosaurs in modern times, having grown to immensely large sizes, terrorizing coastal communities in a fashion not too unlike that of Jaws. The author himself has actually made some, pretty far-fetched claims of the modern-day survival of these pliosaurs and other marine reptiles like mosasaurs and etc. Scott here is a cryptozoologist that investigates the possible survival of some of these reptiles in places like Lake Champlain and whatnot. And I personally, if you ask me, Max is kind of doing paleofiction kind of a disservice by trying to make those kind of claims. You know what I mean?
That could be. Definitely it could be. I'm not sure if I have a real opinion on that, but I think I agree with you there. I think of fiction, keep your fiction and keep your fact.
Yeah, he bases a lot of the stuff on actual cryptozoology, bases it on cryptozoology a lot, which is something that Scott here knows all about firsthand because that's his field that he partakes in. Dabbled in with some paleontology on the side part there. If Scott wants to talk about this a little more.
Well, if I could add in here, if paleofiction's important and is going to have any kind of impact, I think it is, if not from personal experience, from what we've all experienced with the success of movies, from novels, and even into successful video game franchises, paleofiction, specifically paleo writing, is, I think, where a lot of the new stories are going to come from and how they're portrayed, which does go back into previous point about how you portray them. If you're speculating what they can do, speculating what they look like, that causes a double-edged sword. But I don't think the realm of paleofiction is done quite yet. But there are authors like Tom here who is working a lot from the physical evidence and then putting in his observations and his research into that to make them as believable and realistic as possible. And then you have other authors who are making them as fantasy elements in book series that was released here. They're in their second or third book. What is it? I can't remember the title of Dinosaur Kings, I believe. I could be wrong on the title. It's basically Game of Thrones meets Jurassic Park.
Dinosaur Lords, I think is what the title is. By Victor Milan.
Yes. That series, from what I've heard of it so far, I have a copy of the first book. I still haven't gotten around to reading it. Is again a fantasy version of a lot of that with some of those fictional aspects added into it here. So that's the line that paleofiction needs to balance, is from the biological standpoint of what we know the dinosaurs look like from the bone evidence, but then also how much of the speculation and inference we can make from their relationships, how they acted, how they behaved, and such like that, and not give them a lot of extraneous powers like super invisibility.
Oh, this is here's a
predator powers.
Go ahead.
You heard a walkthrough of my logic on that, and that is, birds are birds, and crocodiles are crocodiles, and dinosaurs were somewhere in between. So when it comes to things like color or behaviors, you want to try to have it fit in between there somewhere. Not that it couldn't have diverged outside of that, but you're going to be on the firmest ground, almost as close as bone evidence, when you use living examples. And obviously,
birds correctly, yeah. You look at coloration of birds mostly, and if the, since their lineages are linked, it's safe to say that you look at a bird, you can extrapolate what a dinosaur might have appeared, on the surface.
Exactly.
And mannerisms also. I love the footage of putting a tail on a chicken, just to that video and watching it walk and it gives you an idea what could have been, and I think that's.
Well, I'll give you an exercise that goes a little farther, and it's in this realm where you're matching what really exists to a vision of a dinosaur that nobody's ever seen. I've been doing a lot of thinking about the fact that a Triceratops is, well, a chicken too. It's like, now wait a minute, T-Rex is a big chicken. We've all kind of accepted that over the years. But in terms of that great radiation in evolution that happened in the Triassic period, all of these creatures come from a chicken-like ancestor, two-legged running creature that may or may not have feathers on it, but they all have a common heritage there. And so, in one of my most recent books, I wrote a Triceratops trying to use its beak to chomp on people. Well, that's what a chicken would be.
Oh, wow.
Maybe it's just
that sounds like something that would come out of Dinosaurs Attack.
It's so funny too, because you're talking about Triceratops, and I cannot find anywhere any evidence of this other than my memory now of a television movie done in the 1970s that involved a living Triceratops and a little boy, and I believe it came from a source material, like a short story or novelization. And I'm racking my brain seeing if I can find this movie again, and it's just vanished from view. Although in my mind I remember it perfectly, and now I'm just wondering if I've gone crazy.
Well, this is where Alan Davis would have come in to save your butt here, Jeff. He's the guy that knows. He's the Encyclopedia Obscurata, as I like to call him.
That's normally my job also, but this is one case where I really feel that I'm just not sure. I've had that moment a few times and managed to find the material, but in this case, I've scoured the internet and can't seem to come up with anything. So maybe I just had a wonderful dream one night, and heck, maybe I just gave away a great story.
Yeah, there's a
Dinosaur.
Yeah, speaking of paleofiction, a recent that's actually done a pretty good job of having physically accurate dinosaurs, but having good elements of horror and suspense is something I would like to recommend here. I'm not sure if you heard of it or not. It's called Primitive War by Ethan Pettus. And as far as dinosaurs go, from the artwork I've seen done for this book, the dinosaurs in the book actually are very accurate. I mean, the raptors have feathers. Even the Tyrannosaurus Rex, the Tyrannosaurs in the book, they actually have some feathered plumage on their backs. And you actually have quite a menagerie of nasty fiends in this book besides, Tyrannosaurus, Deinonychus, Utah Raptor. You got the boar crocodiles, Caprasuchus, quite deadly. There's a scene of them, attacking a Triceratops in a river sequence. And another iconic giant predator is Quetzalcoatlus, the giant pterosaur. They haven't really been utilized as, terrors in other stories, but this is the first story I've heard of that actually features these as deadly predators to both beast and man alike.
It is fascinating. I've seen it, and I have yet to buy it and read it, or them, because isn't it a series? Aren't there several?
There will be more. There's a sequel in the works to the Primitive War right now, and there's even talks of, and there'll be anthology books and even a possible film adaptation.
Now, if that has Quetzalcoatlus in it, then that would harken back to my story of about 8 years ago. I wrote a little story called "Riding Quetzalcoatlus," and here's the thing. So I wrote an adventure of humans who are going to try to ride a Quetzalcoatlus, and that's the human interest, and that's the story. But what I always do with these is I try to have a look at that animal. And what I put into it was, and this is real interesting, I had a nesting colony of Quetzalcoatlus in that story. And I'm pretty sure that nobody had ever written either a scientific or a fictional characterization of, a realistically portrayed nesting colony of pterodactyls. We'll see, So I'm interested to hear that he's got Quetzalcoatlus in his story as well. I wonder if he had him in a net breeding ground.
Well, Ethan has described his version of these as giant demon ducks. These are giant demon ducks because these things were voracious predators.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's given
him a forked tongue with barbs on it that allow it to ensnare prey before swallowing it. There's some artwork for this that Bruno Hernandez has done depicting these creatures, and it's actually, some of it's pretty graphic. The book is chock full of some pretty nasty kill scenes involving soldiers and dinosaurs. But it's a lot more than that. This story is set during one of the most brutal conflicts of human history, the Vietnam War.
Mm.
So it's not just man against dinosaur. It's also a story of man against his fellow man. Yeah. And a person of moral standing could, during times of warfare, must abandon their humanity and give in to their savage instincts to survive what the author calls the primitive war.
Yeah.
That's great.
I've only read 8 pages of the prologue, and that first scene in that book is holy crap. It actually scared me how vivid it was in terms of its imagery. It follows the one survivor of a Green Beret platoon. He's being stalked by a Utah raptor whose packmates have decimated his squad. And
sounds like trouble.
One of his squad mates actually ends up killing himself, because of the death of his squad mates.
I'm gonna really take delight in reading that book. I had Utah raptors in all 3 of the first books of the Dinosaur War series, so it will be interesting to see if there are any. Here's what happens in art: it kind of echoes. You know what I mean? The last thing I would say is somebody steals something. No, it kind of echoes. There's writings that have come before yours, and there are going to be writings that follow yours. But the themes, and in this case, the creatures, seem to make repeated appearances. It will be interesting to see. Now, hopefully he's got them fully feathered like I do.
Oh, yes, they are. The raptors are fully feathered. I've actually seen the artwork of these creatures, including the lead antagonist Utah raptor that's nicknamed Cyclops, because it has a knife sticking out of one of its eyes after it got in a fight with a human soldier.
Yeah.
Particularly nasty creature.
Sounds like it has a reason to hate humans.
Yeah.
Yes. These things are portrayed as very intelligent. From what little I can gather, they're portrayed as very smart, sophisticated pack hunters that actually, I have to keep reading to find out more, but from what little I read of this one guy getting stalked, it actually scared the daylights out of me. And this is essentially a killer bird with sickle claws, potential flesh-ripping jaws, and it weighs up 2,000 pounds. And he's not alone. He hunts in a pack. And his smaller cousins, the Deinonychus, can attack from the trees.
Boy, that's great. Well, again, it's reminding me of my own story, because in book 2 of Dinosaur Wars, it opens with a scene where the female, the heroine, is out in the pasture with her cows. She's a rancher's daughter, and all these dinosaurs have come back to Yellowstone country and the surroundings. And just like what you're talking about, there is a pack of Utah raptors. There is a female leader of that pack. She's signaling to her pack mates how to encircle and take out who is the lady who is the heroine of the series. So that's kind of how that story opens the second book. Again, these ideas circle around. They cycle around through writers who read each other's work, and I think it's a good thing. It's kind of like an evolution of the story.
I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the rest of the story unfold.
Yeah.
We know that we'll see humans and dinosaurs together, and we always know what happens.
And this particular story, this story being particularly set in and during the Vietnam War, adds a unique touch to it.
Yeah.
I particularly find that rather fascinating.
Yeah.
Anyhow, Sam wants to talk about the Topps trading card series, Dinosaurs Attack. I'm sure most of us have seen those cards from Topps, the same company behind Mars Attacks. Well, the premise follows a scientist that's using a device called Time Scan that's supposed to allow him to see into the distant past, but this device has an unfortunate side effect. It opens up a vortex that allows dinosaurs to come into our time and wreak havoc across the globe. It's inspired by the 50s B movies like Beast of 20,000 Fathoms, Giant Behemoth, Godzilla, you name it.
The Mars Attacks, the Mars Attacks cards, which obviously they've taken, it was the same company, but boy, the artwork in those is just fabulous. So full of blood and guts. I mean, I love that stuff. Yeah. And also, you always find your favorites in there. I mean, they've got the movie dinosaurs and with fictional real dinosaurs and but they're just so much fun. I mean, there's a lot of energy to those, and I believe that they're trying to get feature version of it off the ground, and so far they've been unsuccessful. But hopefully they'd keep. I enjoyed Mars Attacks, the film, but I would hope that they would keep it more central to the original cards if they did Dinosaurs Attack. I absolutely would love to see a film adaptation of Dinosaurs Attack. I mean, just the premise alone makes for a good monster movie, and also homage to the classic B movies.
They made a comic.
Put it against the army also. And that's always fun.
Yes, they did a comic book or graphic novel adaptation of it.
Yeah, by IDW Press. I've read that before. It was based off a comic that was partially started but never got finished until IDW picked it up. Well, Tom, if you got a bid adios,
I gotta go. It's getting late for dinner, so I better move along. I'm gonna go eat some meat after all this.
Is then it going to be dinosaur?
Yeah, it might be. The chicken cordon bleu. Okay, good talking to you guys.
It was
nice. Goodbye, Tom. Nice to talk with you.
Cereal.
Yeah. Really nice meeting you.
We'll have you back on for other episodes if you'd like to join us. That was pretty cool. Yeah. Very cool to have an author on.
It has been late for me as well, guys. Here, I haven't had dinner yet here, so I'm going to have to duck out as well.
All right, that's okay. I think we've talked for quite a while, and we'll do follow. All right, we'll have you back on for other episodes, Danny, if you'd like to join us.
I'll consider it here. Depends on schedule. But anyways, nice to chat with you all, guys. You guys have a wonderful night, and good tidings to you.
Good tidings to you as well, Danny. I'll be seeing you at G-Fest.
Yep.
See ya.
All right, take care.
Take care.
Okay, I think let's try to